Chapter 1. "Do you still miss her?" Robin asks, as she spoons another scoop of cereal into her mouth, a few drops of milk falling back into the bowl. "Robin!" her mother scolds her from the other side of the kitchen. "What? It's just a question." "That's not the kind of question that you ask someone," her mother responds, before carefully placing another plate in the drying rack. "It's okay, honey," John says, smiling at his daughter, and then turning his attention back to his lovely, dark-haired, green-eyed, ever-curious granddaughter. Mary shakes her head and looks down at the soapy water in the sink and sighs. "Of course I miss her, don't you?" "Every day," she replies. "Me too, baby girl, me too," John says, before leaning over toward her. She slips her arms around his neck and the two embrace, holding on to each other for a few moments. "What was she like when she was young, like Mom?" she asks, as she returns to her cereal. Mary chuckles from over by her position near the sink at the thought of being considered young. John leans in toward Robin. "Your grandmother was a lot like your mother. Beautiful, strong, and tenacious." "What's tenacious?" "Stubborn," John says with a laugh. "I'm not stubborn," Mary replies, turning to face the two of them. "I'm persevering." Robin scrunches up her nose and looks at her. "Isn't that the same thing?" "Yes, stubborn. See what I mean?" John answers. "Thanks, Dad. Any time." He and Robin share a laugh while Mary wipes her hands on a towel before hanging it on the hook beside the sink. She opens the cabinet to her right and pulls out a foil-wrapped Pop-Tart pack. "Catch," she says, before tossing it to Robin. "Go get your brother. I'm not having you miss the bus again." "Okay," she says, jumping up from her chair and then stopping and turning back to her grandpa. "Are you going to be here when we leave?" "I'm not going anywhere yet," he replies with a warm smile. She smiles back and then darts out of the room, stopping briefly to pet Max, John's German shepherd and constant companion. The dog wags his tail and licks her hand. A few moments later, they can hear her bounding up the stairs to get her brother off his Xbox and ready for school. "How are they doing?" John asks, watching the front hall in case she or Jake should suddenly appear. "As well as can be expected." He nods and sighs quietly. "How are you doing?" "The same." He reaches across the table and takes her hand in his, squeezing gently. They sit quietly together, each of them thinking about their individual and shared losses. "So, what are your plans for today?" Mary asks, breaking the silence. "I think Max and I are going to head up to our old campsite." "Isn't it a little cool for that?" "It's like mid-50s. We should be fine." She pulls out one of the chairs and sits down, reaching across the table and taking her father's hand. "Yeah, but that means low to mid-40s up there." "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take a jacket," John says with a wry little smile. "I'm sorry, I can't help it." "It's okay. Like I said, just like your mom." She smiles at him and squeezes his hand gently. "Come on, Jake. I'm not driving you to school today," Mary shouts from the bottom of the stairs. "I'm coming," he yells back as he pulls on his Vans and slips his arms through the straps of his backpack. He stops and checks his hair in the mirror, adjusting a couple of the little spikes before opening the door and stepping out into the hallway. He looks down the steps and sees his mom standing there, her hand on her hip. Never a good sign. "I told you I'm coming," he says, racing down the steps, leaping over the last 3 and landing hard at the bottom. Mary opens the door and ushers him out. "Keep moving, sport." John and Robin are already standing at the bus stop at the end of the block, along with 3 other neighborhood kids. He races down the sidewalk as the bus appears over the hill at the far end of the street. Mary is walking behind him, not willing to run this early in the morning. "Grandpa!" Jake shouts as he reaches the stop and throws his arms around him, hugging him tightly. John smiles and pats him gently on the back. "How are you doing, Jake?" "I'm good. Wish I didn't have to go to school. I'd rather go hiking with you." John smiles and nods. "Yeah, me too, but you know your mom," he says, glancing at Mary as she walks up. "Nice, Dad." "I'm just kidding," he says playfully. "Listen, Jake, what do you say to staying this weekend up at our campsite?" "Seriously?" The bus pulls up and stops, the brakes squeaking loudly. A moment later, the doors open. "Seriously. That'd be great. Okay then, get to school and behave yourself and it's a deal." "You got it," Jake shouts as he climbs aboard the bus. "What about me?" Robin asks. "What about you? You always behave yourself. We don't have to make a deal. You're already part of it." She smiles at him and jumps onto the first step of the bus. "Love you, Grandpa." "Love you too, Birdie." She disappears inside and the door closes with a hiss. Their faces appear in the windows and John and Mary wave to them as the bus pulls away. They stand at the stop for a few seconds, watching until the big yellow bus turns at the end of the block. "I wanted to thank you," Mary says quietly as they begin walking back to the house. "For what?" "For everything you've done since Stephen died." John puts his arm over Mary's shoulder and pulls her close as they walk. "That's not anything that needs to be said." "Well, you really stepped up, and I appreciate it more than you know." "Well, I wasn't always the best father. I feel like I have a second chance," he says. And Mary stops and looks at him. "The past is where it should be, in the past. And for the record, you were a good father when you were home. But the now is what matters," she says, hugging him around the waist. They stop in front of John's Ford F-150 pickup. It's 10 years old, but looks brand new. "How's the shop doing?" Mary asks. "Not too bad. We're trying to get the contract for the local post office." "That would be awesome. All those trucks to work on all the time?" "Yeah, Justin thinks we can get it." "I hope you do." "Thanks, honey." John looks toward the house and then whistles loudly. A few seconds later, Max comes bustling out the doggy door and races over to the truck. John opens the door and he jumps right in, taking up his position on the passenger side. "Be careful up there, okay?" Mary says. "It's been what, 2 years since you've been there?" "Yeah, something like that. I just didn't have the heart to visit after your mom died." "Yeah, I know, Dad," she says, patting him gently on the shoulder. "Make sure you're careful, okay?" "You already said that." "I know, but I'm saying it again." "Okay," he says with a chuckle. "I'll be careful." "Do you have everything you need?" "Yeah, I packed some trail mix, water, and a couple bananas, and some treats for Max. That should do us for the afternoon." "Say hi to Mom for me." "You know I will," he says, before leaning in and kissing her on the cheek. "Love you, honey." "Love you too, Dad." He smiles and then walks around to the other side of the truck and climbs in. Mary walks partway up the front path and waves as John backs out of the driveway. He waves back and then shifts the truck into drive and starts down the street, watching her in the rearview mirror until he can't see her anymore. After turning at the next intersection, he looks at Max and pats him gently on the head. "This should be a good day." Chapter 2. John heads through town, waving to those he passes that he knows and likes, and ignoring those that he doesn't. He pulls into the little parking lot of Crapper's, one of 2 small convenience stores on this side of town. The name is unfortunate, but it's also the last name of the owner. "Wait here," he says to Max before climbing out, leaving both windows about halfway down. The dog walks back and forth along the front seats, anxiously watching John as he enters the store. As soon as he steps inside, he looks behind the counter and gives the heavy-set man with a short beard and large belly a friendly nod of the head. "Hey, Frank," he says. "Hey, John." He heads down the aisle with the snacks, picking out a couple of beef jerky and buffalo jerky packs. Walking to the back of the store, John opens one of the dozen or so glass door coolers and grabs 2 large bottled waters. Looking around, he tries to think about anything else he might need for the day, but nothing comes to mind. He steps up to the counter and sets his purchases on the beat-up old wooden surface. "How's it going?" he says. "Not too bad," Frank replies, as he rings the items up on the nearly antique register. "You going on a road trip?" "Just up to the old campsite." "Kinda chilly day for it." Frank bags up John's snacks and sets them on the counter. "That's what Mary said," he replies as he picks up the white plastic sack. "How's she doing?" he asks, his tone becoming quiet and somber. "She's okay, getting through day by day, I guess." Frank shakes his head. "That was a real shame, what happened to Stephen." "Yeah, it was. He was a good man." "The best." The front door opens and the little bell rings, interrupting their moment of reflection as another customer walks in. "Anyway, have a good day, Frank." "You too, John. Say hi to Max for me." "I will." John opens the door and holds it for a young woman who gives him a friendly smile before stepping past him. He climbs back into his truck and closes the door after setting the bag on the passenger seat next to Max. John knows he won't touch it unless he gives him permission. "You want one?" he asks, and Max begins wagging his tail, the end of his tongue extending out of his mouth. John laughs and pulls the beef jerky pack out of the bag and rips the top open. He extracts 2 strips, sticking one in his mouth and handing the other to Max. The shepherd takes it and jumps down into the floor on the passenger side and curls into a ball and begins chewing. "All right, time we get moving," John says, putting the truck in reverse and backing out of the space. He slips the truck into gear and pulls out onto Main Street, heading west. The sun is still low in the early morning sky as he passes by the last of the major downtown buildings and into the small scattering of houses on the outskirts. He peers through the windshield at the mountain as it seems to rise in front of him, like a behemoth covered in a cloak of green. "Is that a good one?" he asks Max, who looks up at him momentarily before returning to his early morning treat. John tears off a chunk of his own jerky and chews, savoring the sweet and salty flavor. A memory flashes in his head of him and Claire heading to the campsite the last time before her diagnosis. For a moment, he can almost see her sitting beside him, her hand on his leg as they drove out of town. He smiles at her, and then someone honks, the sound tearing him away from his daydream. He looks down at Max again and sighs. "You know, real life sucks, Max." "Order up on 6, Mary says, ringing the bell on top of the stainless steel pass-through window. "Thanks," Shelley says. She grabs the heavy white plate filled with eggs, bacon, sausage, and toast. Mary turns back to the grill, scraping the flat top, pulling the old grease and a bit of leftover egg into the catch trough. She looks up at the long line of white tickets fluttering in the breeze from the overhead fan. She grabs 6 eggs out of the almost empty prep tray and cracks them one by one onto the grill. 2 scrambled, 1 easy over, and 3 sunny side up. "Jerry, go grab some more eggs out of the walk-in," she says to the tall, lanky young man with the short, dark hair, working at the far end of the line. "Sure." She flips the scrambled and easy over eggs and rolls the sausage links so that they cook on the other side. Glancing up at the tickets again, she drops 6 pieces of bread into the toaster and then returns to the eggs. She looks over toward the cooler and frowns. "Jerry!" she shouts. And a few moments later, he emerges with nothing in his hands. "What?" she asks. "We're out of eggs," he says, frowning at her. "Seriously?" He nods and then looks down at the stove. "Wasn't someone supposed to order them?" "Yeah, someone was." Mary closes her eyes for a moment and then shakes her head. "Where is she?" Jerry continues to stare at the flat top and the pieces of slowly sizzling bacon, refusing to make eye contact with her. "Jerry, where is she?" "Out back," he finally replies. "Take over for me," she says, ripping off her apron and tossing it at him. "Don't tell her I told you," he says, as he stands there holding her food-stained smock. "Yeah." She marches past him and down the back hallway toward the rear exit door. She pushes it open, letting it swing wide and slam into the brick facade of the building. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, is standing a few feet away, holding a small white joint between her fingers. She immediately drops it on the ground and smashes it into the pavement with her faded red Converse. "Hey, Mary," she says, while blowing a puff of smoke high into the air. "Don't hey Mary me, okay, Susie? Why are we out of eggs?" "Are we?" "Yes, we are. You're supposed to be in charge of ordering. So why are we out of eggs?" Mary asks again, her hand on her hip. "Oh, I guess I forgot to get them." Mary nods, and then slowly transitions to shaking her head. "We talked about this before, Susie. I can't do this anymore." "Come on, it won't happen again, I promise." "I've heard it before. It's too late. You're fired." "Over eggs?" she shouts. "That and smoking weed at work," Mary says, before walking back inside and slamming the door behind her. Jerry is standing at the grill, working on more than 5 orders by himself. She walks right past him toward her office. "Where are you going?" "To get a new chef," she replies, before stopping, taking a breath, then walking back to the flat top. She looks at Jerry and nods. "After we get these orders taken care of." Chapter 3. John turns his truck onto the side road of the main highway that leads up the mountain to the campsite. Every landmark that he passes brings back some sort of memory of a previous trip. Some of them good, and some of them bad. The missive evergreen that had fallen more than 10 years ago, forming a natural underpass. The old cabin with the partially collapsed roof. And the rusting pickup that had been abandoned on the side of the road for more than 15 years. Max climbs back into his seat and looks out the window as they drive along the twisted rural road. There's no other traffic, and after nearly 20 minutes, they haven't seen any other vehicles. Less than a mile further on, they reach the final turnoff before the road begins descending down the far side of the mountain. John slows down to make the turn. The truck jostles and shifts from side to side as he moves from smooth pavement to rough dirt track. "Son of a bitch," John says to himself. "We should probably fix that." Max looks over at him and tilts his head to the side. "You'd agree if you had any idea what I was talking about." The drive up to the camp itself is slow, and John is forced to stop a few times to remove branches, small boulders, and even a couple of fallen trees from the road. "Good thing I packed you," he says to the chainsaw as he loads it back into the bed. He closes the tailgate and walks back around to the driver's side of the truck and opens the door. Max lifts his head and stares at him. "We're almost there, buddy," John says as he climbs in. Max wags his tail and lays his head down again, and John pets him gently, playfully rubbing his ears before slipping the truck into gear. They drive for another 10 minutes or so, until the road begins to level out. and then abruptly ends in front of a rickety picket fence. The white paint on the slats chipped and weathered. John stops the truck and sits for a few moments, just staring at the sad little barricade. He looks over at Max and sighs. "This is harder than I thought it would be," he says quietly. Max stares back at him. "Well, I guess there's no time like the present." John opens the door and climbs out, holding it for Max, who jumps down and immediately darts for the opening in the fence where a gate used to hang. He follows the dog, stepping through the gap and over the gate that's covered in a thick layer of pine needles and dried leaves. "We'll have to fix that, I suppose." When he looks up from the tumbled-down gate, he catches sight of the little cabin, tucked back a bit amongst the trees. Like the rest of the property, the cabin is a little worse for wear. One of the panes in the right-hand front window is badly cracked, and the roof looks like it could do with some minor, or maybe major repairs. He turns away from the cabin and looks across the front yard toward the little pergola in the distance. He can feel his heartbeat rising as he walks toward the structure. Its red paint is faded and cracked, and the old bench, which used to be bright white, is now a pale, dirty brown. He stops a few feet away and closes his eyes, willing his racing heart to slow. It takes a couple of minutes before he finally takes the last few steps and slowly sits down on the bench after brushing away a collection of leaves and small twigs. The whole structure is situated a few feet from the cliffside, with an amazing view of the town below. It's one of the reasons they chose this spot. "Hi, Claire," he says into the empty air, while looking out over the edge of the mountain. "Sorry, I haven't been here in a while." Max comes trotting over and sits down next to the bench, leaning his head against John's leg. "Things have been rough," he says with a quiet sigh. "It's been a bad couple of years since you've been gone. We lost Stephen, drunk driver. Mary's doing okay, but I know she's putting on a brave face for me and the kids." He pauses for a moment and looks out across the valley before continuing. "They're doing better than either one of us. Robin is turning into an amazing young woman. She's so independent and strong, so willing to do what's right, regardless of what other people might think. You'd be so proud of her. She reminds me a lot of you. Jake. What can I say about Jake?" he says, chuckling to himself. "He's a character. The older he gets, the more it comes out. He's so smart and quick-witted, and he can figure out any problem in just a matter of a few seconds. Mary and I took him and Robin down to Stratford to one of those escape room places. Every time we got stumped, all we had to do was wait a few seconds, and Jake would get us out of whatever puzzle we were in." He pets the top of Max's head and gives him a little scratch behind the ear. "Mary's still got the restaurant. It's going pretty good. She's making it work. I know part of her is just doing it because it was Stephen's baby, but I think the other part really loves the place." He pauses again, closes his eyes, and lowers his head. "I want you to know that I'm trying to be a better man for Robin and Jake. I made a lot of mistakes with Mary, and with you. But I'm trying to make up for that with all of them. I'm trying to make you proud, Claire," he says, his voice beginning to crack. "I love you. I miss you." He lowers his head and stares at the ground for a few minutes, while Max stands a silent vigil. Finally, John takes a deep breath, holding it for a moment, before letting it out slowly. He lifts his head and places his hands on the top of his thighs. "All right, I guess it's time to get to work," he says, as he stands and really looks at the property. Weeds and small saplings have taken over in many places, and the carpet of dried needles and leaves is so thick it's like walking through snow. He heads toward the small shed to the right of the cabin, with Max walking beside him. It takes some effort to get the two barn doors open. The air inside is stale, and the spider webs are thick and plentiful. He brushes them away with his hand and pulls on the little chain dangling from the silver spare bulb suspended from the ceiling. Surprisingly, it lights up. "Son of a bitch," he mutters to himself. "What do you know? Auto billing works." Unfortunately, illumination does not make things better as John looks around the little shed. A thick layer of dust covers everything, and spiderwebs cover the rest. He spots the old grass shears in the corner next to the rake. He grabs both of them, wiping the handles clean as he walks to the cabin. "Better get this aired out," he says as he steps up onto the porch. He glances at the two rocking chairs, and then immediately looks away. He tries the door. It's not locked, but it won't open. He places his boot against the bottom of the door and bumps his shoulder against it. After the second try, it finally opens, the hinges creaking and moaning as they move for the first time in more than 2 years. The air in the cabin is just as stale and musty-smelling as the shed, maybe worse. Max pokes his head inside and then seems to decide that outside is better. He moves to the edge of the porch and lays down with his chin resting on the weathered floor. John turns to the left and flips the wall switch, and the overhead lights turn on. He hits the other switch, and amazingly, the fan begins turning. Inside, everything looks exactly like it did the last time he was here, except for the dust. John moves to each window in turn and opens them to get more fresh air circulating through the house. He moves into the kitchen and stands in front of the refrigerator for a moment. There are a couple of faded drawings still stuck to the front with magnets. The first one is of 2 people holding hands. One short woman with long dark hair and a wide smile, and the other a tall, thin man standing beside her. The figures are well done, showing some real talent by a very young artist. The words, "I love you, Grandma and Grandpa," is written above the figures, and Robin is signed in the lower right-hand corner. The other drawing is much cruder and looks like it might be of Max. It's colored in with gray and brown crayons, and the name Jake and age 4 is scrawled in big block letters in the corner. He can't take his eyes off the drawing of him and Claire. He almost feels rooted to the spot, unable to move or even look away. Finally, something wet touches his hand, and he looks down at Max, looking up at him. He smiles and pets his head. "You're a good boy," he says, and the dog wags his tail before wandering off again. John reaches out and opens the refrigerator door, half expecting to find it full of rotten or maybe even petrified food. But it's completely empty. He can't remember if he cleaned it out the last time he was here. Or maybe Mary stopped up and did it when he was paralyzed by grief for those 4 months. He closes the door again and picks up the broom, tucked in beside the refrigerator. 2 hours later, John walks out of the cabin, leans the broom up against the wall, and sits down in the first rocker. A sheen of sweat covers his brow, and he leans back and closes his eyes. Max wanders over, his nails clicking on the wooden boards of the porch, stopping right in front of him. John opens his eyes and leans forward before gently rubbing Max's head. "Wish you could have helped me with that," he says, and Max tilts his head to the side. Most of the cabin is cleaned, except for the master bedroom, which he just can't bring himself to enter. But the second bedroom, kitchen, living room, and bathroom are all dusted, scrubbed, and de-spidered. He sighs and gets back to his feet and walks over to his truck, with Max following on his heels. He opens the passenger door and grabs the bag off the seat and pulls out one of the 2 water bottles. He twists the top, breaking the seal, and takes a long swig, drinking for nearly 30 seconds before lowering the bottle. "Wait here," he says to Max, before heading back to the cabin and slipping inside. A few seconds later, he emerges with a small plastic bowl in his hand. "Come on," he says, waving the dog over. They walk to the little pergola, and John sets the bowl on the ground and fills it with water. Max waits until he's done and then steps up and eagerly laps up the contents, spilling about a quarter of it in the process. John sits down on the bench and looks down toward the city. The huge sign on the towering smokestack at the old bakery is blinking off and on like it has for close to 100 years. He looks back at Max when his wet nose touches his hand. "You want some more?" he asks, before leaning over and filling the bowl again. When he sits back up, he glances back at the town, and immediately his eyes go to the factory again. The sign is out. He stares at it for a moment, expecting it to turn back on. But when it doesn't, he glances at the traffic light near the front of the bakery. It's off too. The sign for the quick-fill gas station, which normally rotates in a slow circle, isn't moving. He turns his head and looks back at the cabin. Even from here, he can see that the fan in the living room isn't spinning. That doesn't make sense, he thinks to himself. We're not on the same lines up here. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out his phone. He taps the screen, and nothing happens. He frowns and presses the power button, but again, nothing happens. "Oh my God," he mutters to himself as he stands and looks down on the little town. Chapter 4. "What the fuck?" Mary says as she stands in the darkened kitchen. "What happened?" Jerry asks from the far end of the grill. Thankfully, there's enough light coming in through the pass window for them to see what they're doing. "Go check the breaker box," she says to Jerry. He nods and heads down the back hallway. She can hear the customers out front starting to grumble and complain as she waits for him to return. A few seconds later, he comes back around the corner and shakes his head. "It's all on," he says. Mary frowns at him, and Shelley sticks her head through the window. "What are we doing?" she asks. Mary shrugs. "I guess we're not doing anything until the power comes back on," she replies. "Just tell everyone sorry. Anyone who has food can finish up." She starts pulling the food off the grill and tossing it into the large garbage can to her left. "Hey," Jerry says. "What?" "My phone's not working," he replies, showing her the black screen. She reaches into her back pocket and pulls out hers. She taps the screen and gets nothing in return. Before she can say anything, Shelley walks through the swinging doors. "My phone's dead," she says. "Yeah, ours too," Jerry replies. Mary looks at hers again, and then walks through the swinging doors toward the front exit. She passes a dozen customers, most of them staring at their dead phones or complaining to Shelley or Lisa about their orders. She marches out the door, letting it close behind her. She looks up and down the street. All of the traffic lights are out, and at least 6 people are standing outside their cars, tinkering with their engines. "Holy fuck," she says to herself, before turning and re-entering the diner. "Hey, everyone, sorry, but we're going to be closing. Until the power comes back on?" one of the customers says. "Sure," she replies with little conviction. She helps Shelley and Lisa herd everyone out the door. When they finally get the last complainer onto the sidewalk, Mary locks the door. "Everyone, out here," she says, calling them into the dining room. Jerry walks out of the kitchen through the flipping door and takes a seat on one of the counter stools. Shelley stands by the register, while Lisa leans back on one of the booth tables. "When are we going to open again?" Shelley asks. "I don't know." "When the power comes back on," Jerry says, looking at Mary, expecting her to agree with him. And when she doesn't, he frowns. "I don't think it's going to come back on," she says. "What do you mean? It's just a blackout, right?" "It's not," Mary replies while shaking her head. "How do you know?" "Your phones, they're all dead. Look outside. Everyone's car is dead. All the power is out. Everywhere." "Yeah, but they're going to fix it, aren't they?" Lisa asks. Mary starts to answer, and then looks down at the floor for a moment before speaking again. "This is some sort of attack," she says. "An attack? What are you talking about?" "I think this is an EMP attack." "What the hell is that?" Shelley asks. "That's the thing you were talking about last year," Jerry says. "Yeah, it's what they call an electromagnetic pulse." "Where did it come from?" "I don't know, but an EMP destroys any complicated electronic devices, cell phone, computers, TVs, that kind of thing." "The cars?" "Oh yeah, any car built after 1973 or so would be affected. They aren't going to start. This is going to get bad real fast," Mary says. "All three of you need to get out of here, get some stuff, and get the hell out of town." "How are we supposed to get anywhere?" Shelley asks. Mary looks at Jerry, and he nods. "I have my 7D Charger," he says. "I can drive us." Mary nods, and tears begin to fill her eyes. "Take what you need and get out of here," she says. And Shelley and Lisa rush over to her, throwing their arms around her. Jerry stands in the background until Mary waves him over and the four of them stand there, holding each other for several minutes. Finally, they end the embrace, and Mary wipes her face with a napkin from the holder on the counter and looks at the three people who are more family than employees. "Promise me you'll be careful," she says. "We will," they all answer in unison. "Then get the fuck out of here." John walks over to his truck and turns the key, which he left in the ignition. And nothing happens. "Fuck," he says to himself. He looks down at Max and shakes his head. "We have to get to Mary and the kids," he says. "And we can't hike it." He sighs and looks around before his eyes settle on the little shed. He marches across the lawn and slides the doors open again and takes a small step back, staring at the faded green canvas tarp that's hiding something on the left-hand side. "There is no way this will work," he says, before grabbing a corner and pulling. As soon as the dust and dead bugs settle, he looks at the red 1947 Indian Chief with attached sidecar that he hadn't seen in more than 5 years. He and Claire used to ride it every weekend. Sometimes he drove, and sometimes she did. After she got sick, it was too painful for her to sit, ride, or drive, so he put it away, figuring that someday they would get it out again. That day never came. He walks over and unscrews the gas cap and smells the tank. Clean. He sticks his finger inside and rubs it around the rim, and it comes out unstained. "That's a good sign," he says to Max. He looks at the small red gas can under the workbench. "That's going to be skunked," he says, "if there's anything even in there." He grabs the green garden hose off the wall, along with the can, and jogs over to his truck. He opens the fuel door and unscrews the cap. He feeds the hose down inside until he feels some resistance. Placing his mouth on the other end of the line, he sucks hard, trying to sense when the gas will reach his mouth. A couple of seconds later, fuel hits his tongue, and he jams the end of the hose into the can. He spits out the small amount of gas that got into his mouth and monitors the flow, pulling the hose out as soon as the little can is full. He takes the end of the hose and wraps it around the side mirror to stop the flow. He picks up the can and walks back to the shed and fills the tank on the bike, putting in every last drop that he can fit. He screws the cap back on and sets the can back on the workbench. With some effort, he manages to get the bike moving and pushes it out into the light. He bends down and turns the fuel on, clicking the choke to fully open. He climbs onto the bike and makes sure the throttle is off before kick-starting it 2 times. Max stands by staring at him with his tongue hanging out of the right side of his mouth. John reaches down and turns the choke up 2 notches, giving it a little bit of spark advance and a quarter turn of the throttle. "This is never gonna start," he says to Max, who just wags his tail. He turns the ignition to on and gives it a solid kick. A puff of black smoke shoots out the back, and the engine roars to life. He shakes his head and adjusts the choke until the bike is purring smoothly. He climbs off and stands for a few minutes, just staring at the Chief as it warms up. "Well, fuck me," he says with a chuckle. He walks back over to the truck and grabs the backpack out of the bed, slipping his arms through the straps. Max comes trotting over and John bends down and pats his head. "You want to go for a ride?" he asks, and the dog wags his tail. Chapter 5. "Hold on, buddy," John shouts as they make a sharp turn on the dirt road about 10 minutes after leaving the cabin. Max is sitting straight up in the sidecar, letting the wind blow through his hair. John steers around the small boulder they passed on the way up, and then reduces his speed. The last thing he needs is to crash the bike or damage it in some way. He needs to get back to town as soon as possible, but he needs to be careful about it. Mary is a smart girl. She must realize by now what is happening. She's probably doing what she needs to be doing to stay safe. They reach the bottom of the mountain, and John carefully maneuvers the bike onto the smoother and cleaner roadway. He turns toward town and twists the accelerator. The engine sings, and they speed down the highway. About 2 minutes later, he comes upon the first disabled vehicle. The owner is bent over under the hood, fiddling with the engine. John shakes his head, knowing that there's no way that he will ever get that car running again. He roars past him, crossing over into the other lane before smoothly weaving back onto his own side. A few minutes later, he passes a small SUV, heading up toward the mountain. A young mother is sitting in the driver's seat, crying, while her toddler is strapped in his car seat in the back. He looks over at Max and frowns. I know. I feel like an ass leaving her there, but we need to get home," he says. Even talking to Max doesn't make him feel any better about his choice. John twists the accelerator and quickly puts more distance between him and the stranded mother. The closer he gets to town, the more broken-down vehicles he passes, along with their befuddled owners. It doesn't take long before he encounters someone he knows, standing outside their house or vehicle, wondering what the hell is going on. He makes the turn onto Mary's street and immediately has to swerve to avoid an abandoned SUV in the middle of the road. When he reaches her house, he pulls into the driveway and hops off the bike. "Stay," he says to Max, before jogging up to the front door. He tries the handle, but it's locked. He fumbles in his pockets for his keys for a few seconds, before finally getting the door open. "Honey, are you home?" he shouts the second he gets inside. When there's no answer, he dashes back outside, pulling the door closed behind him. He races back to the bike, hops on, and kicks it back to life. Within a few seconds, he's back on the road, zipping down the streets toward the diner. After several twists and turns, he finally reaches Main Street, where Mary's restaurant is located. There are disabled cars everywhere, and many people are just standing in the street or by their vehicles, seemingly unsure what to do. He turns off the street and heads down the alley behind the diner. He immediately spots Mary's car. He pulls in behind her and shuts off the bike. "Let's go," he says to Max, and they both climb out of the seats and head to the back door. He pulls it open and pokes his head inside. "Mary, are you here?" he shouts into the darkened space. "Dad?" she calls back from somewhere inside. "I'm out front." He makes his way through the narrow hallway lined with cardboard boxes filled with napkins, takeaway containers, and other essential items. When he reaches the kitchen, Mary is standing in the doorway to the dining room, shaking her head. Max walks over to her and she pets his head. "What are you doing here? I thought you went to the cabin." "I did," he replies, "until this happened." "Is this what I think it is?" she asks. "I think so." "I thought you were crazy when you told me about it," she says. "Most people do." She stares at him for a moment and then frowns. "How did you get here? There's no way your truck would run." "I've got the Indian." "Are you serious? That old thing still runs? Please tell me you didn't ride it down the mountain with Max in the sidecar." "I sure the fuck did. Now come on. We have to get the kids and get out of town ASAP." "Hold on a second," she says, before disappearing into the dining room and then reappearing a few seconds later with a backpack stuffed to the gills. "Essentials." "Good girl." They make their way back outside to the old motorcycle. "How are we going to do this?" she asks. "I think Max can sit on your lap." She shakes her head. "Why don't I just ride behind you? You can put our backpacks in the sidecar with Max." "That's probably better." "What's your plan when we get to the school?" Mary shouts into John's ear as they're racing down the road toward the kids' school. "What do you mean?" "We can't all fit on this thing," she shouts. "We'll work on that later." John zooms around a disabled sedan and then sweeps back to the other side to pass an abandoned mail truck. People are milling about on the sidewalks, showing each other their phones and pointing at their derelict cars. They pass the old ice cream parlor, where a line of people are waiting outside next to a sign that says, "Free before it melts." John shakes his head and steers around one of those stupid crotch rocket motorbikes parked in the center of the lane. Suddenly, a massive explosion in the distance rocks the downtown area, shattering windows and shaking the ground. John struggles to control the bike for a moment before hitting the brakes. People are screaming and running in their direction as thick black smoke billows into the sky. "What the fuck was that?" Mary asks, looking around John. "I don't know." He looks at the smoke and then turns to Mary. "Isn't the school that way?" he asks. She just nods, a look of fear etched on her face. He releases the brakes and twists the accelerator, and they take off again. Only now they have another problem. Groups of people running in their direction. John is forced to slow down as he weaves back and forth on the road, trying to avoid hitting the panicked pedestrians. Another blast shakes the ground, and more smoke rises into the air. "Go faster!" Mary shouts. "I'm trying." They reach the turnoff for the school, and John suddenly drives them up onto the sidewalk to avoid two buses just sitting in the middle of the road. Max looks over at John before ducking down in the sidecar. "Oh, thank God," Mary says, looking at the school on the left, and realizing that the explosion wasn't as close as she had first thought. But the smoke rising into the sky is slowly growing. John turns into the parking lot and whips them around the backside of the school building. There are a few other parents at the front door, pounding on the glass. Some of them are crying as John and Mary pass by. "Where are you going?" she asks. "Staff entrance," he replies. He had used it a few years ago when he fixed the principal's car and had dropped off the keys. He pulls up on the sidewalk next to the bike rack and cuts the engine. "Stay here, Max," he says, as Mary climbs off. "Where is it?" Mary asks. He points to a single glass door in a little alcove. He jumps off the bike and he and Mary run to it. She tries the handle, but it won't open. "How are we going to get inside?" she asks, more than a little panic in her voice. He bends down and picks up a large rock and smashes the glass 3 times until he creates a hole big enough to stick his hand through. He pulls the push bar and opens the door. Mary takes the lead, running down a short hallway to a small break room with a coffee machine, microwave, and a couple of tables and chairs. "Where is everyone?" John asks out loud. "I don't know." They exit the room into another, much wider hall, lined with doors on both sides, all of them wide open. Mary runs over to the first one, peers inside, and then steps back into the hall again. It's empty. "What the fuck?" John asks. And then he looks at Mary. "Where would they go in an emergency?" "The gym." Chapter 6. "Where the hell is it?" John asks as they're jogging down the seemingly endless collection of hallways. "I don't know. I've only been in there one time. We usually go to the auditorium." John stops suddenly, his shoes squeaking on the shiny tile floor. "This way!" he shouts, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. They run past a pair of trophy cases filled with cups, plaques, and pictures. One quick turn and they reach a pair of double doors at the end of a short hall. John pushes them open, and they walk into a foyer-type area that leads to a massive space with polished wooden floors and high ceilings. "Everyone stay calm," they hear someone say. "We'll get this all figured out. We're safe in here." John and Mary rush around the corner, and 100 faces turn and stare at them. Mary scans through the crowd, skipping over the adults, searching for Jake and Robin. "Can I help you with something?" the man who was speaking says while walking towards them. "Principal Davis, right?" John asks. "Yes, that's correct." "We're here to get Robin and Jake Weaver." "Well, I'm not sure that—" An explosion outside the school interrupts him and shatters the windows and skylights, sending glass raining down onto the students and faculty. Some people start screaming and running for the exits, including some teachers, while others either try to calm the kids or safely guide them towards the exits. "You were saying?" John asks, glaring at Davis. "Jake! Robin!" Mary shouts as she pushes her way through the crowd, moving against the tide. The smell of smoke is beginning to drift into the school through the shattered windows, causing even more panic. "Jake!" Mary shouts again. "Mom!" She hears him reply from somewhere ahead. She pushes past a couple of students and then finally spots him standing on the bottom step of the fold-out bleachers. She rushes over to him, and they embrace, wrapping their arms tightly around each other. "What's happening?" he asks, the fear in his voice easy to hear. "We'll talk about it later. Where's your sister?" Mary asks, looking around as they step apart. "I don't know. We don't sit together," he says, shaking his head, like that was something that she should know. John pats Mr. Davis on the shoulder. "You need to get these kids out of here," he says. "Why? It's just a power outage." "It's not. That should be obvious by now. You need to get them home any way you can. Walk them if you have to, and then get yourself someplace safe." Principal Davis shakes his head. "I don't understand." "Just do what I said," John says, before rushing over to Mary and Jake. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" "I'm all right, but we can't find Robin." "Robin!" John shouts. "Where are you?" "Over here!" she shouts back, and the trio turn and spot her crouched by the end of the bleachers with one of the teachers and a couple of students. They run over to her and Mary grabs her arm. "We have to get out of here," she says, trying to pull her to her feet. She pulls away and frowns. "She's hurt," she says, gesturing to the crude bandage crafted from part of Robin's t-shirt, wrapped around the young lady's right leg. The cloth is stained with blood. John kneels next to Robin and smiles at the teacher. "I'm just going to check this," he says, before gently unwrapping the bandage, revealing a 5-inch shard of glass embedded deep into her thigh. He quickly wraps it again, being as careful as he can. "How bad is it?" she asks. "Well, it's not good, and I don't want to risk pulling it out. It could make things worse." He looks at Mary, and then at the nearly empty gymnasium. "We can't stay here," she says to John. "Well, we're not leaving her here," Robin says. "She needs help." "I know, honey, but—" "I don't care." The teacher reaches up and touches Robin's arm. "You need to listen to your mom," she says. "I'll be fine. You need to go." "Hey, you only live a few blocks away, right?" one of the other students, a boy with dark hair and green eyes, says. "Yeah. I can run you to your house and see if your husband is there, or maybe I can find some help." "I can't ask you to do that, Jason," she says. "It's no problem," he replies before running off. The teacher looks back at Robin and smiles. "Get going," she says. "Lisa can stay with me." Lisa nods her agreement, although she looks as scared as everyone else. "I got this," Lisa says, her confidence a bit underwhelming. "Come on, Robin, we have to go," Mary says, standing and taking a couple of steps, waiting for her to follow on her own. "Robin," John says, his tone both stern and understanding. She shakes her head and stands, but refuses to make eye contact with her mother. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller," she says. "It's okay, Robin, go," she replies, nodding and waving her off. John takes her hand, and the 4 of them race out of the gym, down the hallways, and through the teacher's lounge. When they push through the exit door, they have to squint as the bright midday sun tries to blind them. They turn the corner and Robin spots the Indian and sidecar. Dark black smoke is billowing into the sky from a fire a few blocks to the west. "Where's your truck?" Robin asks. "It's up at the cabin. It's dead." "What do you mean it's dead?" "Most of the cars are," John replies. Robin frowns at him and then looks at Mary. "This isn't just a blackout, is it?" "No, it's not." "Okay," she says, now beginning to understand why they needed to leave. "We can't all fit in that," Jake says. "No, we can't," John says. "You guys are going to take it and head home to pack up anything you might need for the next few weeks." "What about you?" Mary asks. "I've got a plan. Do you care to share?" "Not yet," he replies. "It'll be okay, trust me." John snaps his fingers and slaps the side of his leg, and Max jumps out of the sidecar and runs to his side. "You do remember how to drive this thing?" he asks Mary. "Of course I do," she replies, while climbing aboard. "One in the side, one on the back." "She's talking to you," John says to Robin and Jake. "Oh," he says, before jumping into the sidecar, before Robin even has a chance to move. She climbs on behind her mother, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Be careful," John says. "You too," Mary replies, before kick-starting the bike, letting it run for a moment. "We'll see you at home." John nods, and she slips the cycle into gear and pulls away, disappearing around the side of the school a few seconds later. "All right, buddy, I guess we're on foot," John says. "Hopefully this plan works." Max looks up at him and wags his tail. Chapter 7. "What the fuck are you talking about?" Justin asks, as he wipes his hands on a rag that looks like it will just make things worse. "I'm telling you," John says. You need to get the hell out of town as soon as you can. He walks toward the back of the garage, where a large, squarish vehicle sits covered by a bright blue vinyl tarp. Justin follows close behind, a frown on his face. I don't understand. It's just a blackout. What's the urgency? John stops and turns back to his friend, an employee. That's the thing, Justin. It's not just a blackout. Why is your phone dead? I don't know. Why is the office laptop dead? I don't know. Why won't any of the cars start? I don't know, he replies, his frown deepening. It's because this is way more than a simple blackout. It's an electromagnetic pulse attack. It's called an EMP. It's a weapon used to knock out your target's electric infrastructure. It destroys or disables nearly all electronic devices and systems, John says, while staring to roll back the cover of the vehicle. Is that what the explosions were? He asks, while turning and looking out toward the street. I doubt it, but whatever they were, I'm sure they were related. Give me a hand with this. Justin moves to the other side, and the two of them pull the rest of the tarp off, letting it crumple into a pile behind the vehicle. He walks back around to the front and looks at John. What the fuck is that? He asks. That is a 1968 International Harvester 800A, John says, walking around the red and white SUV. What are you doing with it? I'm driving it out of here, he replies. This thing? Yeah, if you give me a hand. Sure, what do you need? Let's just pull the plugs real quick, make sure that they're clean and good to go. Change out the oil, drain the fuel, and refill the tank. And check the tire pressure. Yeah, and check the tire pressure. About 30 minutes later, they have the Scout up by the front of the garage, the hood up, and a couple of empty oil containers sitting by the door. That should do it, Justin says. You think she'll fire? Probably, don't see why she wouldn't. John jumps in behind the wheel, pulls the choke about halfway out, and turns the key. For a moment, the starter spins and the engine turns over. But even with a little gas, nothing happens. Justin climbs back under the hood, while John waits impatiently in the cab. Give it another shot. He turns the key again, and immediately the engine roars to life, purring like a kitten, as John pushes the choke back in. Justin adjusts the idle slightly, and she settles down into the zone. Nice job, John says as he climbs out of the truck. Thanks. Justin closes the hood. You need to get out of town, John says, as soon as you can. Get Dana and get out. Things are going to get ugly, and I don't think it's going to take long before it happens. Well, unless you have another one of these, I don't know how we're going to do it. Take the old shop truck. I just had her out last week. She runs good. Justin looks at him for a moment, a confused look on his face. Why didn't you just take it? Because I need more room. I've got 4 of us, plus Max. At the mention of his name, he looks up and wags his tail. Besides, what were you going to take if I took it? You would have never gotten this thing running on your own. You didn't even know it was here, John says with a chuckle. True that, he says, before stepping over and giving John a hug. They embrace more as friends than co-workers. Do you think we'll be back? He asks. Maybe, but it's going to be a while, that's for sure. Justin nods and looks around the cluttered shop and sighs. Do you have a gun? John asks. Not on me. John walks over to the workbench set against the back wall and pulls the center drawer open. He reaches inside, running his fingers along the underside of the countertop until they touch the cold, hard steel grips on the pistol he keeps there. He gives it a quick yank, and the magnets built into the holster release. Here you go, he says, handing the gun to Justin. Thanks. Listen to me. If someone tries to take what you have, You do what you need to do, he says, nodding toward the handgun. I hear ya. You take care of yourself and get that girl of yours out of town as soon as you can. I will, he replies, nodding slowly. Where are you going? John shakes his head. I'm not sure yet. Probably going to head to the cabin for a few days, and then I was thinking about heading up north. My dad used to have some property up there. He called it the homestead. It's been 20 years since I've been there. Don't really know if it's even still there. Whatever you do, be careful, okay? I hear ya, he replies, echoing Justin's words. Justin turns and heads out the back to get the old truck. John walks through the tiny waiting room and into the even tinier, incredibly messy office. He opens the side drawer and pulls the Glock out, slipping it into his belt. He stands behind the desk for a few seconds, just looking around at the dozens of pictures pinned to the crowded bulletin board. Jake, Robin, Mary, and Claire make up the majority of subjects. He pulls down one picture of him and Claire on the beach in Florida at Siesta Key. She looked so happy. It was 5 months before her diagnosis. He slips the picture into his pocket and moves to the front door, turning the lock and flipping the sign around to the closed side before walking back into the garage. He climbs into the Scout and moves it just far enough forward that he can get the garage door rolled down. After climbing out, he stands outside and reaches around the corner and hits the button on the wall, and the mechanical door begins to slide down. Come on, Max. The shepherd jumps up and runs over to him. John looks down at him and smiles. Truck. Max turns and jumps into the driver's seat, and then crosses over to the passenger side. John slips into his seat again and closes the door, watching in the rearview mirror until the garage door stops moving. He puts the Scout into gear and pulls out into the street, turning left and heading to Mary's house.